Well, good morning, guys. We're going to be diving right back in, so if you want to get your Bibles out, we're going to Matthew 5 as we continue our study. If you've been around, or if you've not been around, I guess I should say, we have been in an extensive period of time looking at the life of Jesus, which brought us to the Sermon on the Mount. And where we're at overall right now is we're in the Beatitudes. And if you've not been with us the last couple of weeks, I do encourage you to go back and watch the video podcast, or maybe go to iTunes and subscribe to the audio podcast to catch up a little bit, because we all, in the Beatitudes, they do build on one another. So you will be able to get things out of today's study, but you really see the power of the Beatitudes as you see it building up. And so 2 weeks ago we did an overview. Last week we did the first two Beatitudes, and I was going to do the next two Beatitudes today, but the more I got into it, I think it was on Friday, I cut the fourth one. We'll do that next week. It seemed like there was enough meat and potatoes that the Spirit had like a certain focus on this particular Beatitude without pulling away from it by trying to do too much too fast. So we'll get to verse 6 next week. But so that also means that if you're using YouVersion, you have a couple extra verses and a couple extra things in there that show back up next week. They're just not going to happen this week. So we're just going to kind of continue in. So with that, if you're ready, we're going to dig in. We've already talked about blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, and blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. The beginning of the Beatitudes, where all humility comes into being a very important and strong part of our life. But now we're going to be moving into verse 5. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So if we're going to talk about meekness, the one thing we have to do is make sure that we go against any kind of stereotypes or any kind of natural thinking that we might have that would be wrong. And the first thing to really know about meekness, it is not the same as weakness. And I think a lot of people kind of put the two together. Being meek is not weak in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, being meek has quite a bit of power to it, which is where we get that we inherit the earth. And so I want to really kind of strip away some of those things, because if we think of meekness as being a train wreck, or I'm not allowed to say anything, or I'm never allowed to be angry, or I'm not allowed to stand up against injustice, or that other people, my role is just to get beat up on, then we're not going to get the fullness of what this particular Beatitude is talking about. So blessed are, happy are those, congratulations to the meek. So let's start. And some of this, because I changed the focus at the last minute, I'm going to have to, for our note takers, kind of repeat a couple times over, because I don't have it in the PowerPoint. But when we look at meek, if we're going to get a proper perspective of it, then of course we're going to go back to the original Greek. And the Greek word here is parousi, and I'm actually pronouncing that one correctly. Just in honor of JT, I went and learned how to say it, so nobody would be upset. But it's parousi, and then it has multiple definitions. Some you don't have to write down, but just some that we're not necessarily surprised by, like a mildness of disposition or gentleness of spirit. But it's the third definition that I really kind of get grabbed by when it comes to what we're talking about today. So this is the one that I will repeat twice for you. And if you don't get it, don't worry, just let me know and I'll send you the notes. Do it all the time. The definition for parousi that we're focusing on is relying on God, okay? Relying on God rather than your own strength to defend yourself against an injustice. Okay, so we'll read that together all in one spot for you. Relying on God rather than your own strength to defend yourself against an injustice. That's not all. That's just the first part. The next part is this. Knowing that God is permitting the challenge to purify and to grow his children from it in his time. Knowing that God is permitting the challenge to purify and grow his children from it in his time. So, all of it together. Parousi means relying on God rather than your own strength to defend yourself against an injustice, knowing that God is permitting the challenge to purify and to grow his children from it in his time. And it's not a fun process. Okay, we know that. It's not a fun process. We all go through different struggles. We go through different challenges. I was meeting with some friends this week, and a situation came up that's somewhat commonplace. So she didn't know how to answer a friend because a friend was talking about a loved one that they had that got killed in a car wreck, and why would God do that to them? And she didn't know how to answer. And she was asking for the logic standpoint of it, because obviously emotionally, you meet people where they're at, you love on them, but the truth is, did God cause that accident? Did that person maybe use their own free will decision to be texting while they're driving and they got in an accident and they died? Or could it be that the other person that was involved in the accident, that they've made the free will decision to go get drunk or have a few beers and they think they're good enough to drive home, but yet they end up crashing into this person's car and killing them? Is that God causing it? And then death was never supposed to be part of God's design in the first place, and sin came in and corrupted everything. Is that a part within it? Like, there's so much complexity within that. The only thing that we know for certain in every situation, whatever we go through, is God will make something beautiful out of it if we lean into Him in His time. In His time. I don't know of anything that I've been through that I chose for myself or other people have chose for me that God has not done beautiful things. I know one of the songs that we have sang, He turns our ashes into beauty, and we sing it passionately, but sometimes we forget that in our life, and we focus on just the unfairness of it all. And the other thing that we kind of forget within that is that God, as our Father, as He's leading us through these times, He's got it covered. It's not ending in destruction permanently. He has a plan. He has a way. And I think we understand this better when we don't think about it as us going through things, but if we look at it from either as a parent, if you have kids, if you have someone that you mentor, that you love and been in their lives for a long period of time that's younger than you, if you have a dear niece or nephew as an aunt or an uncle that you're involved in their lives, we get this when it comes to them, just not so much for us, that when we have to give them age-appropriate space to struggle and to go through hardship and learn how to be responsible, how to work through things, or how to have patience. We do it all the time. It's a train wreck situation for them, but for us, we get it. We know that it's not going to be horrible. For instance, I'll go back several years, and she loves when I talk about it, but Emily, when she was like 4 or 5, just like every other kid in the world wanted an iPod. It seemed like all of her friends had an iPod. And I don't know, again, going back, this is a decade. Now I think really all 4 and 5-year-olds have a tablet and an iPod. I didn't see any reason for a 5-year-old to have their own iPod, but I lost. And so I took my old iPhone, which probably didn't have a number after it. It was probably just the original iPhone. And stripped it down, put music on it, put games on it. That's what she was using as an iPod, and she loved it. She loved it. And but she was also, being a 4-year-old or 5-year-old, not always the most responsible with it, and kind of flippant with it. And we would have talks. And again, she's 4 or 5. And one day we were going into the house, the old house, and we had a sidewalk, and it kept flying out of her hand and hit the side of the sidewalk just right, where it just shattered. And so did she. I mean, just emotion. It was just like, just a prized possession. So do you go out and just get another iPod real quick and just replace it? Or do you see a little bit of a learning opportunity? And her birthday was a month away, and we talked about, well, if you do some chores and you save up your money, we save up our money, we'll go together. And maybe we can get another one that we can strip down and do. And so she had an opportunity to do that. She hated that month. The world was over. But she did learn to be able to be kind of responsible and be able to move up into that. That's just part of parenting. I knew the whole time she was fine. I knew she was covered. I knew it wasn't the end of the world. And that's basically how we have to look at us being grown through God. We do go through circumstances that will be fixed in His time, just not mine. But like the kid, any kid, we think the world is falling apart all the time, instead of trusting Him and leaning into that. So that's really where we have to lean into that meekness, is knowing God has it and that we're in His time instead of our own time. So let me, again, since we have note takers, I'll give you, we did this last week, we'll do it again. We'll give you 3 things about meekness that I hope will change your perspective of what meekness is. First one is this, and we do have this on the screen, I believe. Meek people understand righteous anger. Okay? Meek people understand righteous anger. If we are weak, a lot of times people will think that means I'm not allowed to be angry. Or if we're being meek, we don't know how to handle that sometimes from a Christian standpoint. And so to start addressing that, I'm going to give you another quote that I'll do in sections and then bring it all together for you. But I've got two quotes from Aristotle that I think will kind of help us get around this a little bit, because quite frankly, many of us struggle with anger in one extreme or the other. Aristotle says this. He said, this is how you know if it's righteous anger. They have a healthy attitude between two extremes that are not healthy. Okay, this is how you know if you have righteous anger. They have a healthy attitude between two extremes that are not healthy. We live in a world that has extremes all the time, and there's always some kind of rubber band effect that puts us on the other extreme. If you want to talk, Republican and Democrat, if you want to talk about masks, if you want to talk about vaccines, if you want to talk about anything, there's always these two extremes that are ready to throw down at any moment in any way, shape, or form because they know the truth and you don't, and they clash. But usually in the middle, there's the best of both of those with some balance that brings you into a healthy place on those topics where you can have those conversations. That's true on anything. I just use politics as an example. In this case scenario, if we're talking about anger, there's two extremes of selfish anger and I can't be angry. Those are two extremes I see a lot of people struggle with. Anger really comes into play when what? You're not getting what you want. That's really what anger comes down to every single time. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It could be a good, bad situation and you're stepping into it or whatnot. But there's a lot of times we're angry just because of our own imposition or what we think should happen versus what other people think, and that just triggers. It goes into this angry, and some people lean into that. And they come out throwing, or they come out, puking words all over people. On the other side, what could be bad is that I can't be angry. That anger is something that intimidates me. Anger is something that's bad. Anger is somehow something that's not Christian, even though it's an emotion that God gave us. So there's these two extremes, and we have to find what does the middle look like when it comes to righteous anger. You guys know I love my mom and dad very much, that they are the foundation that I stand on outside of Christ, and that they are just mean so much to me. And my mom was a person who really struggled with this. Mom was raised in a household. She was raised with a biological mother and an adopted father, and his name was Joe. And I didn't know Joe that well. Joe passed away when I was 2 years old. But from my understanding, through my brother and sister who are older than I am, a good guy, good grandpa, great individual, war veteran that fought for our country, and I've still in our collection of family past. I still have letters that came from like the president about his service and other things about his service. But he also was an alcoholic. And when he was an alcoholic, anger was an issue. So to my mom, raising up in this household, anger meant screaming. Anger meant throwing things against the wall. Anger meant cussing somebody out. So for her, how she defined anger from her experience, she didn't want that for our household. And we didn't have that in my household. But I remember one time that my parents yelled. I was in the back bedroom, and Mom and Dad was in the living room. I still to this day don't know what the fight was about, but they raised their voices. I can't even say they yelled. They raised their voices, and I was wrecked. I was maybe like 8 or 10 years old. I thought the divorce, the family's falling apart, because I just have never heard that before. I kind of relate to, I was watching Everybody Loves Raymond the other night, and Amy married into their family, for those who watch the show. And Amy, because they yell a lot, like it was really stressing out, and she says, my family never yells. They wouldn't yell if one of them was on fire. I mean, that's just kind of the feeling, because Mom didn't know how to express anger. When I got into my 20s and 30s, the downside of expressing all your anger is that you just throw it up on everybody else and they have to deal with it. When you express it yourself, you don't throw it up at all, so it all builds up. And she didn't know how to express that out. And so she did do some counseling. Counseling, again, I highly recommend. Counseling and getting help is what we all need help at different times. So I really wish we could get over that stigma and that selfishness of I could do everything, because that's not what we're made for. But anyways, Mom was going to counseling, and I was, again, before my ministry years and before my wisdom in life, but I still had the same sense of humor that I do now. And I remember Mom was talking to me about some of the things that the counselor said and some of the therapy things that were going on and different stuff. And I said, Mom, I've got an idea. This will just let everything just be free and let you move forward. And she said, okay, what is it? I said, when somebody angers you and when they're offensive to you, just look at them. Okay, Nate, you're a good guy. You won't beat me up for this. Just look at them and just smile and think in your head, bite me. Now, my pastoral advice has gotten so much wiser than that since then. And I did get smacked, and Mom did take in yell Tommy or whatever. But for that release, I think there's probably better ways to do that. But that's how it worked for Mom. And then Mom did learn how to express anger, and I still need to apologize for my father and my siblings, and because she really didn't know. She didn't scream, she didn't throw things, but she let you know she was mad. Yeah, she did. So there is a medium, there is a middle spot in this. Let me give you a little bit more of what Aristotle says with this that I think would be a little bit more beneficial than my advice. He says, righteous anger is being mad or being angry at the right people on the right occasion for the right amount of time. Righteous anger is being mad or angry at the right people on the right occasion for the right amount of time. And for those of us who struggle with anger, it usually holds on to us a lot longer than what the right amount of time is. Again, it's not always on the right occasion. We're just mad because we're not getting what we want, or it's not the right people. Because we listen to somebody else say something that somebody said about us, we never go talk to that person like a responsible adult, and then we end up being mad at them for ages before you find out that that other person lied to you, or they didn't know what they were talking about. That's the danger and the abuse of gossip. So making sure you have, again, the right people, the right amount of occasion, the right amount of time. And if we look at our example, the example that we always go to is going to be Jesus, okay, and how he handled his anger. And we do have times when Jesus had anger. If you look at Jesus in the temple, when he ripped apart the place and was throwing the money changers and the money all over the place and the tables and everything else. I shared with you before, I've got one buddy who swears that he just believes that Jesus, just out of anger, stepped on one of their foot just out of anger. I don't think he did that. I think that would be beyond the righteous anger standpoint. But he did have righteous anger. And I've heard a multitude of different reasons why people think that Jesus threw the tables, and it could be a mix of them. For some, it's because the money changers were cheating people, and that doesn't happen in the Church of God, or at least should not be happening in the Church of God. For others, it's because they're selling sacrifices right there where you're supposed to bring of your best, and so it's just a lot easier to travel to the temple without your sacrifice, and so they're kind of doing a cheap way or halfway way just to kind of fulfill the law. Others have said that because they were set up in the Gentile code, which is the only area Gentiles could go into within the sabbatical, that they were stopping the worship of the Gentiles, and he was furious about it. Whatever the reason, it was righteous. And he was mad at the right people who were doing it, at the right occasion. This is going against what God has. This is going against his truth. This is going against his worship for the right amount of time, because we don't see Jesus go back afterwards to get on his computer and get on social media complaining about these guys. He took care of the situation, and he went back to work. That's what righteous anger looks like. That's meekness. And nobody that day doubted his power. No one doubted his power. He was just doing it the correct way. Or if you look at him with the hypocritical leaders, him and John the Baptist had very little patience when it comes to hypocritical leaders and called them brood of vipers. Jesus one time stood in front of a crowd and said, look, when it comes to what they're teaching, man, follow what they're teaching. They're teaching good stuff. Just don't follow their lies, because they're hypocrites and they're sinners. They're goofballs, absolute goofballs. But what they're teaching is right. And then he didn't go on with a big campaign, taking it again, going back and ignore the religious leaders, blah, 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 blah. It was the right people doing the wrong thing, and there was the right occasion, and he stood up against it. And had no problem going up against the Pharisees and Sadducees. There's a power behind meekness that we need to have. Here, I'll give you this one. You got tired of the quote yet? This is William Buckley. He says, if you want to find a gauge of what's the right time and right way, is if you're getting angry. I'm going faster on this one than the other ones. This one. If you're getting angry about an offense and not going to God first, you're probably already messing up. If we want to find a gauge of what's the right time, right way, is if you're getting angry about an offense and not going to God first, you're probably already measuring up. When you put God first, you're talking about meekness. Because it's not about my power, it's about his power. And as a child of God, I do have power, but I have to do it the right way or else I'm way off track. Does that make sense? So we have to understand righteous anger. Okay, I spent most of our time there. Let me give you a couple more. Number 2, we'll put this up for you. Meek people understand controlled power. Meek people understand controlled power. This is, again, the difference between weakness and meekness. And I think this is best portrayed or explained with a little bit of a metaphor, because if we go back to that original Greek word as far as controlled power, it applies to us as humans, but they use the same word when it comes to animals. And I think if we look at it from an animal standpoint, we can understand ourselves a little bit better. How many people here are animal people? Okay, we're going to get a lot of, okay. Even the people who say, I won't raise my hand because he asked me to, raise their hand because they're so passionate about their pets. Okay, how many people are cat people? Okay, you are correct. How many people are dog people? Okay, did you raise yours? Oh my gosh. Okay, when it comes to cats and dogs, first bit of advice, if somebody doesn't want a dog, the appropriate thing is not to send them multiple pictures of dogs saying this is a dog that your family should have. Amanda book. I don't address things individually from the pulpit, but Amanda book. You would never? I heard it started pretty early this morning. Anyways, I have a feeling you're going to win that battle sooner or later. No, sorry, inside joke of who messing with Mike, and Mike not enjoying the current situation that he's being put into. Kids would like to have a dog. Dogs. He wants a dog too? He did raise his hand when I said dog people, and that confused me for a second. Okay. Listen, I personally prefer cats. I've always thought of myself as a dog person growing up, but we always had outside dogs, and every time that I've tried to have an indoor dog, it's just never worked out for me too well. Until now. Moose, we've had him now for a year and 3 or 4 months. He's a pain in the butt, but we love him. He's doing okay. So I'm kind of in that middle range. So I can start to kind of see the two sides. The cats, the things I love about cats is if I'm going on a trip, and we do travel throughout the year, I don't have to board a cat. I don't have to add, money to take and find a good place for the cat to be taken care of, because you just put out extra food and you put out extra water, and you just ignore them. And if you want to cuddle, you pick them up and you cuddle them. And if you don't want to pet them anymore, you put them down and they don't get the feelings of it. They're just like, okay, move on, right? They're there just to knock your stuff off of the counter. That's it. That's the only reason why they're there. Cats are awesome. Now, I love having cats in our house, and that's something that we've had often, but I would not get a bobcat and put him in my house, right? I don't think he's going to be quite as cuddly. Mira might. I think that's actually might be what I get you guys for a wedding present. But most of us, sane ones, no, just kidding, I'm going to put a bobcat in our house because they're probably not going to be as cuddly, and that's not something you want to pick up, and it's something that probably does mind if you try to mess with it in any way, shape, or form, because it's wild. And it's angry, and it could do bad things to me that I don't want in my household. And so the difference there, though, is that my cats are domesticated. And they are just most. Now, I will say this. If you mess with Millie Cat is Emily's cat that generally lives in Emily's room. And she hates everyone. Okay? Basically, she hates everyone. Now, if I walk in and I just put my hand down, then she'll come over and let me pet her. But if I go to her, not good. And if you try to pick her up and take her any place she doesn't want to go, you're going to be in pain. But she can live in our house. Why? Because she has a controlled power. The exact same DNA as that bobcat, same history, but has learned how to control that power. Same thing with the dog. One of the reasons why I want a dog and I don't take advantage of it enough, but Moose does a pretty good job of it, is I like that image of me and my pickup truck with the dog sitting on the side and you're driving down the thing. I like that image. I like that. And Moose does like car rides. Like if we go outside, a lot of times he goes straight to the car thinking we're not going for a ride. I would not do the same thing with the coyote. It just makes no sense. Now, Moose has power. I will say this. I didn't say enough about Maggie. Maggie has very controlled power. She never will give you an inch of problems, but if Moose gets up in her face, he learns quickly not to. But Moose, generally, I mean, he has power, and especially as a puppy, we've had to learn how to control that power. That's the difference between meekness and weakness, is that we have power, but we learn how to control it. We learn how to domesticate it. We learn how to have it be in submission to our God. That's what meekness is. There is great power when it comes to the meekness of the people of God. Number 3, meek people have a trusting attitude towards God. Meek people have a trusting attitude towards God. And if you truly do, I know all of us say we trust God, but then, think about your week and how you feel when you're getting your bills paid and there's not enough money there and that kind of stuff. If you truly trust God and his promises, you don't have to get angry and come out throwing, and throwing fists and verbally going nuts and those type of things. You don't need that at all. So let's look at this a little bit in Psalms 37. You can lose your place there in Matthew 5. We're not going to come back to it today. But there is a section in Psalm 37. It's a song or poetry that David has written several hundred years before Jesus was born. But as we go deeper and deeper into it, it just is really quite phenomenal about the consistency of God. So if you go to Psalms 37, we're going out to verse 3, is where we're going to start. This is what he writes. He says, trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord and do good. 2 things you can choose to do. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Things we choose. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. I have a choice, and then he does the rest. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as the noonday. Be still before the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Fret not yourselves over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil devices. Go into verse 10. In just a little while, his timing, the wicked will be no more. Though you look carefully at his place, he will not be there. This is why when you look back over the last 10, 20 years of your life, and you've come up against seasons that were just, everything's falling apart, and now you don't even think twice about it. This is what was going to. In his time, he's going to take care of it. So we can kind of maybe not stress out so much about today's issues if yesterday was taken care of so well. Anyways, just a little while, the wicked will be there no more. Though you look carefully at his place, he will not be there. But the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace. The meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace. Hundreds of years before Jesus was at the Mount. David tells us 4 things to do. You ready to write them down? Trust, delight, commit your way to the Lord, and rest. That's how we get through issues. Trust, delight, commit your way, and rest. That doesn't mean that I get to be lazy and not do my part. That's committing your way. But God does his part as I take that first step. Let's go back to our example, which is, thank you, Jesus. One person was listening earlier. Thank you. Go back to Jesus' rest. And we could go pretty much any point, but just to his rest. After the praying, which shows us the intensity of his prayers and shows us that he, quite frankly, did not want to take the cross in his humanness. He says, if there's any way, Father, for you to remove this cup from me, please. He didn't want it. He emotionally was overwhelmed by it. But not my will, your will be done. And as he knew that that was his Father's will, he trusted his Father, and he delighted in his Father, and that brought meekness, which brought power. When he comes out in the middle of the night and Judas shows up and he's got the troops with him, and according to biblical scholarship and the verbiage that's used there, it could literally be a couple hundred guys easily that came with Judas to get one. And they come out and they come up and to arrest Jesus. It says, and I love that Scripture gives us such great details, he steps out of the shadows into the moonlight and says, "What are you looking for?" I don't know about you, but to me that's power. He's not hiding behind a rock. He's not hiding behind a tree. He just stands up and says, "Okay, what are we doing here?" Judas comes up, best friend, could be heartbreaking, kisses him on the cheek. He, by a logical standpoint, from an earthly standpoint, Jesus wouldn't know what that means. But he does know what it means. And he doesn't break, he doesn't get mad, he doesn't punch him. He just looks at him and says, "Okay, so you're going to betray me with a kiss." I think I'd wreck Judas. Personally, I think I'd wreck Judas. That's power. He's in control of this entire situation. When the guy steps up to arrest him and Peter slices off of his ear, when there's 12, and since Jews versus hundreds, that means, hey, it's time for a bloodbath. We're going to destroy these guys. They just started a fight. And it was going to be out of control. It's going to be a mob mentality, and Jesus simply bends down, picks up the ear, heals the guy, and says, "Peter, we don't do that. That's not our way." And you're telling me that not everybody on both sides said, "What? What just happened?" That's meekness. It was power. He had control of that group. Well, he still got arrested. Of course he did. It was the Father's will. Every step of the way, he was in charge. And he was doing his Father's will. But the meekness brought power because he can control the situation in a godly way for the furtherment of the kingdom. Do you see that? I mean, if you look at his conversations with Pilate, Pilate would be like, answer me, and Jesus wouldn't answer any of his questions. And he's like, "Don't you know I've got the power for either your life or your death?" And Jesus said, "No, you don't. My Father has that power." And if you really look at the text, Pilate didn't want to kill Jesus because he was just taken by the guy. He's like, I don't see anything that warrants this. Unfortunately, he was more of a coward than he was of his own convictions. But Jesus made an impact on Pilate because of his meekness. And if we're really honest with ourselves and we think about the problems in our marriage, or the problems at job, or the problem at schools, or the problems we have out and about in life, or a problem that we have in this place or that place, if we came in with meekness instead of anger, and you did it God's way, for God's purpose, and you put yourself a little bit more on the backside instead of me wanting to get what I want, anger issues go away, and meekness allows for God to move. Isn't that awesome? Nobody? Isn't that awesome? That's how it works, instead of just going off the cuff in our own emotions and what we want. There's a huge difference between that selfishness or being afraid of anger. It's called meekness, and we follow him through. If we look at Jesus' life, it was trust, delight, commit your way, and rest. And then the world is ours. The world is ours. It doesn't have control over us anymore because God does. I personally love that. I hope you guys are excited about it too.